My name is Jolie Cooper. I'm 28 years old, and on the afternoon of my grandfather's will reading, I found the driver's side door lock of my Honda Civic punched clean out, sharp metal shavings scattered across the concrete parking garage floor. Someone had taken a crowbar to my car while I was upstairs. They wanted the inheritance my grandfather had just handed me. But the joke was on them, because all he left me was a single rusted iron key. That is the part you can wrap your head around. The part that still makes my chest tight is what happened 3 weeks later when I stood at a podium in front of 200 of Kentucky's highest society members, holding the document that was about to send my own parents to federal prison. And my mother looked at me with pure terror. Welcome back to Revenge Order, where we uncover the dark secrets families try to bury and watch the scapegoats rewrite the ending. If you are listening today, drop your age and where you are tuning in from down in the comments and hit that subscribe button. You will want to hear every detail of this one. I need to take you back to the beginning. It started in a temperature-controlled mahogany-paneled law office in downtown Lexington. My grandfather, Silas Cooper, built a regional logistics empire from a single flatbed truck he bought in the 70s. He was the only person in my family who ever treated me like a human being instead of a stain on the rug. When he died, the air in our house did not feel heavy with grief. It felt electric with anticipation. His estate attorney, Mr. Sterling, sat at the head of the conference table and broke the seal on the final will and testament. My mother, Evelyn, exhaled a breath she had been holding for months. Sterling cleared his throat and read the distributions. They sounded like a lottery payout. $3 million in liquid capital directed to Evelyn and my father, Marcus. The sprawling primary estate in Woodford County went to my older brother, Trent. A luxury penthouse condo in the city center went to my sister, Sloan. They sat around the table exchanging tight, victorious smiles. The golden children had received their crowns. I kept my hands folded in my lap, tracing the cuticle of my thumb. Then Sterling reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a small manila coin envelope. He slid it across the polished wood toward me. The paper made a faint scrape against the varnish. I opened the flap. Inside rested a single iron key. The edges bloomed with orange rust. Stuck to the metal was a yellow note bearing Silas's jagged handwriting. Open when alone, trust no one. My mother leaned over my shoulder. The scent of her Chanel perfume hung thick in the confined space of the boardroom. She peered into the envelope, her lips curling into a sharp, rehearsed smirk. A key to his old tool shed, she laughed. The sound was brittle and bright. Guess you were not his favorite Jolie. Maybe you can sell the scrap metal to cover your rent. Trent snickered from across the table. Sloan did not even look up from her phone screen. I did not flinch. I did not offer a witty comeback or storm out in tears. As a senior inventory auditor, I make my living finding the discrepancies people bleed to hide. I understand that the loudest people in the room are usually the ones terrified of the math. I folded the note, slipped the rusted metal into my blazer pocket, and stood up. I walked out of the office without a word, letting the heavy oak door click shut behind me. I rode the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The ambient hum of the fluorescent lights echoed off the concrete walls. I approached my 10-year-old car, fishing in my purse for my fob. My hand stopped halfway to the door handle. The interior light was off, but the glove box hung open. Registration papers and old napkins were scattered across the passenger seat. The lock mechanism lay on the ground. My family had just laughed at the rusty key upstairs, but someone had already tried to steal it. I drove away from the downtown law office with both hands locked onto the steering wheel. A sharp draft whistled through the ruined metal of my driver's side door. The cold air bit at my shoulder, a physical reminder of the threat trailing me. My mind raced, filtering the sequence of events through the cold logic I applied to my corporate audits. People do not risk felony destruction of property in broad daylight to steal a joke. If my mother truly believed that envelope held nothing but a rusted piece of junk, there would be no reason for someone to pry open my glove box. They wanted what Silas gave me. They wanted it before I could figure out what it was. My apartment sits on the second floor of a brick walk-up on the edge of the city. It is a quiet neighborhood, mostly nurses and graduate students who mind their own business. I climbed the stairs, the fabric of my dress shoes whispering against the carpet. I reached the landing and stopped cold. My front door stood ajar. The wooden frame was splintered around the deadbolt, thin shards of pine littering the welcome mat. I held my breath, listening. The apartment was silent, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I pushed the door open with the toe of my shoe and stepped inside. The living room looked like a storm had ripped through the drywall. Every couch cushion had been gutted, the foam padding pulled out and tossed across the rug. My bookshelves were swept bare, novels and framed photos dumped in a chaotic pile. I walked toward the kitchen, my shoes crunching over broken ceramic from a shattered coffee mug. The pantry drawers were pulled off their tracks, silverware spilled across the linoleum. I paused in the center of the wreckage, my eyes scanning the room for what was missing. My flat-screen television still hung on the wall. My jar of emergency cash sat untouched on the counter. A silver necklace rested in plain sight on the side table. This was not a random burglary. A thief looking for quick cash grabs electronics and jewelry. Whoever tore my home apart was searching for something small, something specific, and they were in a desperate hurry. They were looking for the envelope. The first overlapping conflict clicked into place, shifting the dynamic of my entire family history. My parents and siblings were not just greedy. For 28 years, they had operated from a place of arrogant superiority. But the slashed cushions and the splintered door jamb told a different story. They were terrified. Silas had handed me something capable of threatening their new empire. They did not find it. Before I ever put my car in drive at the law firm, my auditor instincts had kicked in. I had taken a piece of duct tape from my center console and secured the iron key flat against the plastic molding deep underneath my steering column. It was a paranoid habit picked up from years of handling sensitive corporate financial ledgers, and it had just saved my life. My phone buzzed in my blazer pocket, vibrating against my ribs. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message from my brother, Trent. "Hey, Joe. Mom is really worried about your mental state. You seemed confused at the reading today. Let us meet for coffee tomorrow. Bring Grandpa's old junk, and we can throw it out together. I am here for you." I stared at the words, reading the subtext hidden beneath the fake sibling affection. The phrasing was deliberate. He did not ask how I was doing. He stated that I was confused. He documented that my mother was concerned about my mental state. They were already building a narrative. Growing up, Trent was the untouchable golden child. If a window broke in the hallway, Trent would point at me, and my mother would ground me for a week without a single question. I was the built-in scapegoat. Now they were elevating that childhood dynamic to a legal strategy. By documenting my supposed instability in writing, they were laying the groundwork to declare me incompetent. If I tried to use whatever Silas left me, they would show a judge these messages and claim I was having a breakdown. They wanted me to bring the key to coffee so they could take it from my hands while wearing the mask of a concerned family. I did not reply. Silence is a weapon when your enemy expects compliance. I walked over to the corner of my living room. My desk had been swept clear. My primary laptop smashed onto the hardwood floor. The screen was cracked into a web of dead pixels. They thought they had crippled my digital access. They were wrong. As a senior inventory auditor, I routinely investigate shell companies, offshore accounts, and corporate embezzlement. I know how people with money try to silence the people with the math. I moved to the hallway closet, pushed aside a stack of winter coats, and unscrewed a false panel in the ceiling trim. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out my secondary backup server, a heavy black brick of encrypted solid-state drives. I carried it to the kitchen counter, plugged it into an alternate power supply, and booted it up. I needed an insurance policy. My fingers flew across the keyboard, writing a specialized script tied to my personal email domain. I bundled every file I possessed regarding Silas Cooper, the logistics company, and my own personal identification records into an encrypted folder. I linked the folder to a dead man switch. It is a simple but ruthless piece of programming. I set the timer for 48 hours. If I did not log into this specific terminal and type a complex passcode every 2 days, the server would automatically bypass all local networks and email the entire encrypted bundle to the fraud division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, copying 3 independent investigative journalists in the process. I hit enter. The command line flashed green. The script was active. If my family sent someone to hurt me, or if they succeeded in locking me in a psychiatric ward, their victory would trigger an unstoppable federal probe into their lives. The physical threat against me was now neutralized by a digital guillotine. With the safety net in place, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusted iron key I had retrieved from my car. I set it under the harsh white light of my kitchen pendant lamp. At first glance, it looked like a prop from an antique store. The bow was heavy, shaped like an old-fashioned clover, and coated in a gritty layer of orange oxidation. But as I rotated the metal under the bulb, the illusion faded. The rust was only applied to the head of the key. The biting, the jagged teeth that actually interact with the pins of a lock, was pristine, machine-cut steel. It was not old. It was disguised. I grabbed a magnifying glass from my surviving office supplies and leaned close to the metal surface. There, stamped microscopically into the lower edge of the bow, was a sequence of letters and numbers. LSS 402. My pulse kicked against my throat. I knew that prefix. During an audit of a wealthy real estate developer last year, I had seen those exact initials on an expense report. LSS stood for Lexington Secure Storage. It was a private, highly guarded vault facility on the industrial side of the city, catering to clients who required absolute anonymity. They did not use digital access codes or biometric scanners. They used specialized physical keys to prevent hacking. Silas had not left me a shed key. He had given me access to box 402. I looked around my ruined apartment, the slashed cushions and broken glass, reflecting the desperation of a family willing to cross any line to protect their new fortune. They had the millions, they had the sprawling estate, but they did not have the truth. I slipped the key into my shoe, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and pulled a dark hooded jacket over my blazer. The hunt had officially begun. The dashboard clock glowed 2 a.m. as I pulled my Honda into an empty industrial park on the outskirts of the city. Rain slicked the asphalt, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I parked 3 blocks away from my destination, killing the engine and slipping out into the cold night air. I walked the remaining distance on foot, keeping to the shadows of the brick warehouses. Lexington Secure Storage sat behind a tall, wrought iron fence, a brutalist concrete structure that looked more like a fortress than a commercial business. The facility catered to clients who valued discretion over convenience. There were no smiling receptionists or digital keypads waiting to harvest your biometric data. The entry protocol relied on an analog system designed to leave 0 digital footprint. I approached the side entrance, my hood pulled low over my face. A single security camera stared down from the concrete overhang. I pressed the rusted iron key into the heavy brass deadbolts of the exterior door. The metal teeth engaged with a satisfying, heavy click. The door yielded heavy on its hinges. I stepped into a sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway that stretched out like a sterile tunnel. The air smelled of ozone and industrial floor wax. Security mirrors hung at every corner, but the corridor itself was dead quiet. The vault rows were organized alphabetically. I navigated the labyrinth until I reached section L, tracing the engraved brass plaques until my finger stopped at box 402. My heart thumped a steady rhythm against my ribs. I inserted the key into the dual-cylinder lock. It turned smoothly, stripping away the illusion of the applied rust. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The inner drawer was a heavy iron lockbox, cold to the touch and weighing at least 20 pounds. I dragged it out, setting it gently onto the polished linoleum floor. I sat cross-legged beside it, unlatching the top lid. If my mother had opened this box, she would have screamed in frustration. There were no neat stacks of $100 bills. There were no velvet pouches filled with heirloom diamonds or gold bullion. Inside sat a thick stack of paper bound in heavy legal covers, alongside a small encrypted hard drive. I pulled my backup tablet from my backpack and connected the drive. A prompt demanded a password. I thought for a moment, recalling the day Silas taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 12 years old. He always told me that numbers were the only universal language that refused to lie. I typed the date of the day my logistics auditing certification arrived in the mail. The light on the drive blinked green. The partition unlocked. I opened the digital files alongside the physical paper ledgers. The documents were heavily redacted corporate tax returns, property deeds, and internal accounting spreadsheets. I began to read, my eyes flying across the columns and rows. The cold environment faded away as my professional training took over. I traced the flow of capital, matching routing numbers from the digital files to the physical signatures on the legal paper. Within 20 minutes, the sheer genius of Silas Cooper revealed itself to me. Silas knew that if he simply wrote a standard will, leaving the primary estate and the liquid capital directly to me, my parents would have dragged me into probate court the very next morning. They would have hired the most aggressive litigators in Kentucky, draining the estate in endless legal fees. They would have claimed Silas was suffering from dementia, painting me as a manipulative opportunist who coerced a sick old man. In the American legal system, the side with the most money usually grinds the truth into dust through sheer attrition. Silas knew he could not protect me in a public courtroom, so he built a trap in the shadows. According to the documents in my lap, Silas had restructured his entire empire 3 years ago. He took the primary estate in Woodford County, the luxury condo building, and all the physical assets and placed them under the umbrella of a corporate entity named Oakwood Holdings. The will that Mr. Sterling read to my family gave Evelyn and Marcus total ownership of Oakwood Holdings. That was why they were smiling. They believed they had just inherited the keys to the kingdom. They were wrong. The ledgers detailed a second hidden phase of the restructuring. 18 months ago, Silas used his authority as the sole board member of Oakwood Holdings to execute a quitclaim deed. He quietly transferred the actual physical land, the brick-and-mortar structures, and the intellectual property out of Oakwood and into a blind offshore trust based in the Cayman Islands. Then Silas took out crippling commercial loans using Oakwood Holdings as the borrower. He leveraged the company to the brink of bankruptcy, legally obligating the corporation to millions in high-interest debt. Evelyn and Marcus did not inherit a gold mine. They inherited a hollowed-out shell company loaded with toxic liabilities. Silas had handed them a live grenade and convinced them it was a diamond. I opened the final legal binder in the iron box. It was the master charter for the offshore blind trust. The document named the sole executor and beneficiary of the true estate, granting that person absolute legal authority over the physical properties and the untethered liquid cash. The name on the line was Jolie Cooper. I held the paper, my hands shaking. Silas had given me the sword to cut them down, but he let them put their heads on the chopping block themselves. I reached for my tablet to copy the files, but the screen suddenly flickered. Above me, the harsh fluorescent tubes lining the ceiling snapped off with a sharp electrical crack. The ambient hum of the air conditioning died instantly. The hallway plunged into near total darkness, illuminated only by the faint green glow of the emergency exit signs at the far end of the corridor. Lexington Secure Storage operates on a localized motion sensor grid. The lights only shut down when the primary circuit is manually overridden from the front desk. Someone had just bypassed the security guard. My stomach dropped against my spine. I closed the tablet, the soft click echoing too loudly in the quiet space. I shoved the digital drive and the thick stack of ledgers into my backpack, zipping it shut with slow, agonizing care. I pushed the heavy iron drawer back into the wall, turning the rusty key and slipping it into my pocket. Then I heard it, the distinct, heavy thud of tactical boots against the linoleum. It was not the shuffling walk of a night watchman. It was the deliberate, synchronized tread of two men moving with quiet purpose. They were entering the main corridor, their footsteps growing louder as they turned the corner into Section J. They were 2 rows away. I pressed my back against the cold steel of the vault doors, my breathing shallow and tight. Trent had not just sent someone to toss my apartment. He had hired professionals to track my movements. The fixers my brother used to clean up his gambling mistakes were hunting me in the dark. I dropped to a crouch, letting the shadows swallow me. I crept toward the opposite end of the aisle, my eyes fixed on the heavy gray door of the emergency stairwell 15 feet away. A narrow beam from a high-powered flashlight sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the floor just 1 row over. The light hit the polished tile reflecting onto the ceiling. "Check the locks," a low, gravelly voice ordered. "See if any doors are unlatched." I did not wait to hear the response. I pushed off the balls of my feet, darting across the open gap of the hallway. My shoulder collided with the push bar of the stairwell door. The heavy metal gave way, slipping open just enough for me to slide through before the flashlight beam swung around to catch my shadow. I let the door close silently behind me, trapping myself in the pitch-black vertical shaft of the stairwell, trapped between the secrets in my backpack and the men hunting me down. I kept my back pressed against the cold cinder-block wall of the stairwell, holding my breath as the heavy footfalls of the fixers faded down the hallway. When the silence returned thick and unbroken, I descended the concrete steps 2 at a time. The heavy fire door at ground level pushed open with a groan, spilling me out into a narrow alleyway. The freezing Kentucky rain hit my face, washing away the stagnant air of the vault. I kept to the shadows of the brick warehouses, my shoes splashing quietly through shallow puddles, until I reached my car. I locked the doors the second I slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, my knuckles stark white under the amber glow of the streetlights. I had escaped the physical threat, but the adrenaline crash left a metallic taste on my tongue. I barely slept that night, the encrypted ledgers locked inside my backup server while the storm battered my apartment windows. The next morning, the battlefield shifted. My family realized I had slipped through their fingers in the dark, so they changed their tactics. The conflict escalated from physical intimidation to calculated professional sabotage. I arrived at my auditing firm just before 8. The corporate office usually hummed with the low murmur of phone calls and the clatter of keyboards. Today, the atmosphere felt brittle. As I walked down the central aisle toward my cubicle, my colleagues averted their eyes. Conversations dropped into hushed whispers. A tight knot formed in my stomach. Before I could even set my briefcase on my desk, the managing partner of the firm, Mr. Bennett, appeared in my peripheral vision. His face was set in a rigid, unforgiving mask. He did not offer a morning greeting. He simply pointed toward the glass-walled Human Resources conference room at the far end of the floor. I walked into the room and took a seat at the polished mahogany table. The HR director sat next to Bennett, a thick manila folder resting under her folded hands. Bennett slid the folder across the glass surface. Sitting on top of the beige cardboard was a small silver flash drive. "We received an anonymous phone call this morning," Bennett said, his voice flat and professional. "The caller advised us to check the bottom left drawer of your desk, the one you keep locked. Building security drilled the cylinder an hour ago." He tapped the silver drive with his index finger. "That contains unencrypted tax identification numbers, offshore routing codes, and proprietary financial data belonging to 3 of our highest-paying clients. It violates every compliance protocol this agency upholds. We are looking at a breach of fiduciary duty, Jolie. We are looking at federal corporate espionage." I stared at the silver drive. My pulse hammered a steady rhythm against my ribs, but my face remained an unreadable mask. This was Trent. It had his fingerprints all over it. Growing up, my brother never learned how to solve a problem with his own hands. If he wrecked his luxury sports car, my father wrote a check to the dealership. If he failed a college exam, a generous donation to the Alumni Fund miraculously altered his transcript. Trent believed the entire world operated on a simple transactional basis. He thought he could buy reality. Now he was trying to buy my ruin. His strategy was brutal and effective. If I went to the police with the offshore trust documents asserting that my family was defrauding the grandfather's estate, the authorities would look into my background. If they found a disgraced auditor fired for stealing sensitive corporate data, My credibility would evaporate. I would look like a disgruntled, unstable thief trying to extort her wealthy relatives. They were building the narrative. They were trying to put me in a box where no one would ever believe a word I said. But Trent made a critical miscalculation. His fixers relied on cinematic tricks, planting evidence in a desk drawer like a scene from a cheap spy movie. I did not rely on tricks. I relied on data. I did not panic. I did not cry or beg for my job. I leaned forward, my posture relaxed, projecting a forensic detachment that caught Bennett off guard. I did not put that drive in my desk, I said, my tone even and measured. And if you plan to involve the authorities, I suggest we verify the internal security metrics before this firm embarrasses itself by falling for a setup. Bennett frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. What are you talking about? I conduct vulnerability assessments for a living, Mr. Bennett. I know the architecture of this building. My desk drawer is secured by a standard pin tumbler lock, which anyone with a paperclip can bypass. But the digital perimeter of this floor is not. I turned to the HR director. I need you to pull the network access logs from the primary server room. I also need the radio frequency identification data, the RFID, swipes for the East Elevator Bank from 6 yesterday evening until 7 this morning. The HR director hesitated, looking at Bennett. He gave a curt nod. She opened her laptop and accessed the administrative portal. Within 10 minutes, the raw data populated on the conference room monitor. Lines of code and timestamps scrolled down the screen. I stood up and pointed to a specific sequence in the third column. The anonymous caller knew exactly which drawer contained the drive. I explained, tracing the line of text. That means whoever planted it had to physically enter my cubicle. The cleaning crew clears this floor at 9 at night. The motion sensors in the East Wing were tripped at 3 in the morning. I tapped the screen. Look at the corresponding RFID swipe at the elevator. The badge belongs to Jason, the new summer intern from the accounting department. Furthermore, the metadata on that silver flash drive will show a creation timestamp of 2 in the morning, downloaded directly from Jason's terminal, not mine. My terminal was powered down and locked by IT at 5 yesterday afternoon. The silence in the glass room grew heavy. The irrefutable math hung in the air, dismantling the frame-up piece by piece. Bennett picked up his desk phone and ordered Jason to the conference room. The intern walked in 5 minutes later. He wore an ill-fitting suit, his skin pale and slick with nervous sweat. He took one look at the server logs on the monitor and the silver flash drive on the table, and his facade crumbled. He did not possess the hardened resolve of a career criminal. He was just a kid drowning in student debt. Under Bennett's harsh questioning, Jason broke. His voice trembled as he confessed the entire scheme. He explained how a wealthy guy named Trent approached him at a downtown bar, buying him drinks and asking casual questions about the firm. By the end of the night, Trent handed him a thick envelope of untraceable cash in exchange for a simple favor: download the files, drop the drive in the drawer, and make a phone call. Trent promised it was just a corporate prank, a harmless inter-office rivalry. Bennett dismissed the intern, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and profound relief. He turned back to me, the rigid mask replaced by an expression of genuine respect. "Jolie, I apologize," he said, closing the manila folder. "Your job is safe. We will handle Jason, and we will keep this internal to protect the firm's reputation. Take the rest of the day if you need it." I thanked him, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the glass room. I had survived the professional assassination attempt, but the victory offered no comfort. As I returned to my cubicle and sat down in my ergonomic chair, the true scope of the war settled over my shoulders like a weighted blanket. My family was not going to stop. The slashed cushions and the planted flash drive were just their opening moves. They possessed millions of dollars in liquid capital from the toxic LLC. They could hire endless fixers, bribe countless interns, and manufacture infinite lies until one of them finally stuck. I could not spend the rest of my life playing defense against a superior financial force. I needed to change the rules of engagement. I opened my secure server and brought Silas's offshore trust ledgers back onto my screen. I stared at the columns of numbers, formulating a new strategy. If I kept fighting them in the shadows, they would eventually wear me down through sheer attrition. I needed to buy time to dig deeper into the final files Silas left behind. To do that, I had to stop their relentless attacks. I had to feed their arrogance. I had to hand them a victory so convincing, so perfectly tailored to their narcissistic worldview, that they would lower their guard and look away. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my sister's contact name. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted. I sent a brief text message to my sister. The location was a high-end artisanal coffee shop downtown, the kind of place that served $8 lattes and catered to the city elite. It was Sloane's natural habitat. I arrived 20 minutes early, choosing a small table near the back corner. I needed the lighting to be dim enough to hide the calculation in my eyes, but bright enough for her to see my performance. I pulled out a thin, cream-colored folder from my leather briefcase and set it on the marble tabletop. Inside was a doctored document I had spent 3 hours fabricating the night before. I took the legitimate corporate letterhead from Silas's old logistics company and overlaid a mundane, worthless list of depreciated warehouse assets, expired commercial lease agreements, and obsolete truck inventory. It looked official, it looked legal, and it was entirely useless. Sloane pushed through the glass entry doors 10 minutes late. She wore a tailored beige trench coat draped over her shoulders, oversized designer sunglasses shielding her face from the overcast sky, and a leather handbag that cost more than my first car. She did not walk. She glided, projecting an aura of untouchable wealth. She spotted me in the corner, her lips pulling into a thin line of mild distaste. She approached the table and sat down without removing her coat or offering a greeting. I went to work. I allowed my shoulders to slump, collapsing the rigid posture I usually maintained. I rubbed my eyes hard until the whites turned bloodshot and the skin around them puffed up. When I looked at her, I forced my hands to tremble, letting my fingers tap nervously against the rim of my coffee cup. I needed her to see a broken, defeated woman. I needed her to believe the break-in at my apartment and the professional sabotage at my firm had crushed my spirit. "What is this about Jolie?" she sighed, checking the diamond watch on her narrow wrist. "I have a fitting for the equestrian gala in an hour." I pushed the cream-colored folder across the cool marble. My hand shook just enough to make the paper rustle. "This is what the key opened," I said, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. I let a rehearsed tear spill over my lower lash line, charting a wet path down my cheek. "It is just an old lockbox." This was all Silas left me, just an inventory list of scrap metal and abandoned warehouses. Sloane eyed the folder with predatory suspicion. She reached out with a manicured hand, flipping open the cover. Her eyes scanned the first page. She did not possess the financial literacy to audit the document, but she recognized the depreciated values and the mundane corporate language. She saw exactly what she wanted to see. She saw garbage. "I do not want any trouble, Sloane," I continued, my voice breaking on the final syllable. "The men who broke into my apartment terrified me. Trent almost got me fired. I cannot fight you guys. I just want to be left alone. Tell Mom and Dad they can have it. I am done." The tension in Sloane's shoulders vanished. A smug, victorious smirk spread across her face, transforming her features into a perfect mirror of our mother. She snapped the folder shut and slid it into her expensive leather handbag. "Smart girl, Jolie," she purred, leaning back in her chair. "You finally figured out how things work in the real world." Grandpa was senile at the end. He was just holding on to trash and pretending it was treasure. "Leave the business to the adults. Go back to your little cubicle and stay out of our way, and Trent will call off his people." She stood up, adjusted her sunglasses, and strutted out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. I sat alone at the marble table. I picked up a napkin and wiped the fake tear from my cheek. My trembling hand steadied instantly. My posture straightened. The performance was over, and the trap was set. As I watched Sloane disappear down the sidewalk, the ambient noise of the cafe faded, replaced by a sudden, vivid memory from my childhood. I was 12 years old. It was a humid Saturday afternoon in July. Evelyn and Marcus were at the country club schmoozing with local politicians and real estate developers, drinking gin, and parading Trent and Sloan around the swimming pool. I had been left behind at the house, banished to the kitchen so I would not ruin their perfect family portrait. Silas had walked through the back door, his work boots leaving faint trails of warehouse dust on the pristine hardwood floor. He ignored the spotless, untouched formal dining room and sat right next to me at the worn kitchen island. He smelled like diesel fuel, black coffee, and old paper. He pulled a dense, multi-columned balance sheet from his jacket pocket and smoothed it flat on the counter. He handed me a sharp pencil. "Numbers do not lie, Jolie," he had said, his calloused finger tapping the bottom margin of the paper. "People will dress up their lies in expensive suits. They will smile at you. They will pour you expensive wine. And they will tell you exactly what you want to hear. But the math always tells the truth. The math never cares about your feelings, and it never asks for your permission." He spent the next 3 hours teaching me how to track hidden liabilities and phantom assets. He showed me how to read the negative space on a ledger, how to find the secrets people tried to bury in the margins. Sitting in the coffee shop decades later, the profound weight of that memory finally clicked into focus. Silas did not just love me because I was the family outcast. He cultivated me. He recognized my analytical mind, and he spent years quietly sharpening it into a weapon. He knew his logistics empire would eventually fall into the hands of predators, and he needed an auditor to dismantle them. That was why he trusted me with the offshore trust. He knew I would not let emotion blind me to the data. I stood up, tossed a $5 bill onto the table, and walked back to my car. The fake ledger I handed to Sloan was a temporary shield. It would take Trent and his high-priced attorneys exactly 1 week to verify the assets listed in that folder and realize they were worthless shell properties. For 7 days, my family would bask in their arrogance, believing they had bullied me into submission. For 7 days, they would stop hunting me. I drove back to my apartment, the shattered doorframe now secured by heavy steel deadbolts I had installed myself. I locked myself in my makeshift home office, booted up the encrypted server, and pulled the real offshore trust files back onto my monitor. I had 1 week to build a guillotine. I needed to map out the exact sequence of the financial transfers Silas executed before his death, preparing the legal documentation required to freeze my parents out of the estate permanently. I opened the final set of digital binders, focusing on the expense columns from the last 12 months of his life. I wanted to see how Evelyn and Marcus had managed his daily care while he was trapped in hospice. I cross-referenced the personal banking withdrawals with the medical invoices submitted by the estate. My eyes darted across the glowing rows of data, searching for the negative space Silas had taught me to find. An hour into the audit, the numbers stopped making sense. I leaned closer to the screen, my brow furrowed in deep concentration. I isolated a specific column of recurring cash withdrawals. Every 14 days, exactly $4,000 vanished from Silas's primary checking account. The withdrawals were not routed to the hospice facility. They were not earmarked for nursing staff or specialized medical equipment. I checked the dates of the withdrawals against Silas's medical journals. The timeline matched perfectly with his rapid physical and cognitive decline. Every time the money vanished from the account, his charted symptoms grew worse. His hands shook, his speech slurred, and his memory fractured. I traced the routing numbers attached to the cash withdrawals. The digital trail led directly to a private boutique pharmacy account managed exclusively by my father. My breath caught in my throat. The cold logic of the spreadsheet laid out a terrifying new reality. The financial theft was just a symptom of a much darker disease. I was no longer looking at a simple case of corporate embezzlement or a contested will. I was staring at a calculated, systematic, chemical assault. The glare of the computer monitor cast long shadows across my office wall. I scrolled through the digital ledgers, my eyes tracking the repeating $4,000 debits. Every 14 days, a cashier's check cleared the bank. Every 14 days, the money vanished into a private pharmaceutical escrow under my father's name. I cross-referenced the dates with the medical logs Silas's in-home nurses kept during his final year. My mind pulled me back to the fourth Thursday of last November. The dining room table at the Woodford County estate groaned under the weight of crystal goblets and silver platters. Silas sat at the head of the table. He did not carve the turkey. He sat slumped in his high-backed chair, his chin resting near his chest. His right hand rested on the linen tablecloth. His fingers shook with a rapid, mechanical rhythm, rattling the heavy silver fork against his porcelain plate. A thin line of saliva gathered at the corner of his mouth. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, stared blankly at the crystal chandelier above us. Evelyn stood at the opposite end of the room, pouring a vintage Cabernet into a glass. She raised her voice, ensuring every guest and extended relative heard her. "It is rapid-onset Parkinson disease," she sighed, placing a manicured hand over her heart. "The doctors say it is progressive. Marcus and I are managing his care around the clock. It is a burden, but family does what family must." We all nodded. We ate our dinner while the patriarch of the Cooper family faded into a chemical fog. Sitting in the cold light of my apartment, the truth crystallized. Silas did not have a neurodegenerative disease. My parents had weaponized his health care. The cash drops funded unauthorized off-book sedatives. Evelyn and Marcus kept him compliant, confused, and locked in a physiological prison while they drained his accounts and restructured Oakwood Holdings. They turned a brilliant man into a drooling prop to justify their dominion over his empire. A chill traced the ridge of my spine. This crossed the line from corporate theft to physical assault. If they were willing to poison my grandfather to secure his wealth, the fake ledger I gave Sloan would only buy me a fraction of the time I thought it would. They were predators, and predators do not stop hunting just because you throw them a scrap of meat. The harsh buzz of my apartment intercom shattered the silence. I flinched my hand instinctively, dropping to the heavy flashlight resting on my desk. I checked the digital clock on my monitor. 8:15 in the evening. Too late for a delivery, too early for a noise complaint. I walked down the narrow hallway, my socks sliding over the hardwood floor. I pressed my eye to the peephole. It was not Trent. It was not the fixers in their dark jackets. Standing on the other side of the deadbolt were two uniformed police officers. Behind them stood a man wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a black leather medical bag. I recognized his profile, Dr. Aris Thorne. He was a boutique physician who catered to the Lexington elite, offering discretion and creative diagnoses for clients who preferred to keep their scandals out of public hospitals. He was also a staple at Evelyn's summer cocktail parties. My analytical brain mapped the threat matrix instantly. If the police wanted to question me about a crime, they would send detectives. Uniforms handled domestic disturbances and emergency wellness checks. Thorne's presence meant this was a medical intervention. They were executing an involuntary psychiatric hold. In Kentucky, a 72-hour emergency evaluation is known as a 5150. Evelyn and Marcus had realized I was a loose end. Even with the fake ledger and Sloan's designer handbag, they viewed my independence as a liability. They were utilizing the legal system to neutralize me. If Thorne handed the officers a signed affidavit claiming I was delusional, erratic, and a danger to myself, the police possessed the authority to break down my door and drag me to a locked ward. Once I was admitted, the dominoes would fall with lethal speed. Marcus would file an emergency petition in family court. He would use the hospitalization as proof of my incompetence. A judge would grant him immediate medical and financial conservatorship. Conservatorship meant Marcus would gain the legal right to sign documents on my behalf. He would control my bank accounts. He would access my safe deposit boxes. He would assume total authority over the blind, offshore trust Silas had hidden in my name. The rusty key would legally belong to him. I stepped back from the door, my breathing shallow but steady. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford when the state is standing on your welcome mat. The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. A heavy fist pounded against the reinforced wood. "Jolie Cooper, this is the Lexington Police Department. Open the door, please." The voice was firm, projecting the bored authority of an officer executing a routine pickup. They expected a crying, hysterical woman. They expected a victim who would scream about conspiracies and evil parents, thereby proving the exact diagnosis Dr. Thorne had written on his fraudulent clipboard. I walked back to my office. I needed to respond, but I had to control the staging. I closed the offshore trust files, locked the encrypted server, and pushed the device back into the hidden ceiling cavity. I slid my blazer over my shoulders, smoothing the fabric to ensure I looked the exact opposite of a psychiatric patient in distress. I returned to the entryway and disengaged the dual deadbolts. I pulled the door open, leaving the heavy brass chain engaged across the gap. The hallway light spilled into my apartment. The two officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their hands resting near their duty belts. Dr. Thorne lingered a few steps back, his eyes darting away when I met his gaze. He looked like a man who knew he was committing perjury, but had already spent the bribe money. "Good evening, officers," I said. My voice was calm, pitched at a low conversational volume. "How can I help you?" The older officer stepped forward holding a yellow slip of paper. "Miss Cooper, we received a call from your parents. They expressed deep concern for your well-being. We have a medical professional here who has signed an emergency evaluation order. We need you to come with us to the hospital." I looked at the yellow paper. It was a standard intake form. "My parents called you," I repeated, digesting the information without a single spike in my vocal inflection. "Did they mention that we are currently involved in a highly contentious probate dispute regarding my grandfather's estate?" The officer frowned. "That is a civil matter, ma'am. This is a medical emergency. Dr. Thorne has evaluated your recent behavior and determined you require observation." I shifted my gaze to the boutique physician. Thorne adjusted his expensive silk tie. "Jolie, your mother is very worried," Thorne said, using a patronizing, soothing tone that made my skin crawl. "The break-in at your apartment, the stress of the will reading, it has triggered a paranoid episode. You are imagining threats. We just want to get you somewhere safe so you can rest." He was good. He wove the genuine break in a crime they orchestrated into a narrative of mental collapse. If I yelled that my brother sent the burglars, I would sound insane. If I screamed that my parents poisoned my grandfather, they would snap the handcuffs on me right there. The trap was beautifully constructed. It used the truth to manufacture a lie. "I appreciate your concern, Dr. Thorne," I replied, keeping my hands visible and relaxed. "But I have not been your patient since I was 16 years old. You have not conducted a physical or psychological evaluation on me in over a decade. Signing a medical affidavit without a direct examination violates the State Medical Board Code of Ethics." Thorne's jaw tightened. The patronizing smile faltered. "I consulted with your primary family members. The erratic behavior is well documented. Documented by the people attempting to steal my inheritance," I countered smoothly. I looked back at the officers. "Gentlemen, I am not erratic. I am a senior inventory auditor for a major financial firm. I worked a full 10-hour shift today. My apartment was burglarized, yes, which your department has a report on. My family is attempting to use that trauma to strip my legal rights." The younger officer shifted his weight, glancing at his partner. The calm, rational presentation was disrupting their expectations. They were prepared to wrestle a lunatic, not debate a forensic accountant. "We still have a signed order from a licensed physician, Miss Cooper," the older officer insisted, tapping the yellow paper. "We are mandated to execute it. Please unchain the door. If you refuse, we will force entry." The threat hung in the corridor, stark and undeniable. The law was a blunt instrument, and my parents were currently holding the handle. I could not talk my way out of a signed warrant, no matter how rational I sounded. The police do not adjudicate medical fraud in the hallway of an apartment building. They follow the paper. And right now, Evelyn and Marcus held the winning paper. If I unchained that door, they would take my freedom. Once I was in the locked ward, Thorne would inject me with a sedative. I would wake up legally tethered to the very man who poisoned my grandfather. I needed to deploy a countermeasure. I needed a bigger piece of paper. I rested my hand against the cold brass of the door chain. The older officer had just issued a direct threat to breach my apartment. In the American legal system, a signed medical affidavit acts as a skeleton key, bypassing standard civil rights under the guise of an emergency intervention. If I refused them entry, they would shatter the deadbolts, drag me onto the landing, and categorize my resistance as further proof of my mental instability. I unslid the brass chain. It rattled against the wooden frame. I pulled the door wide open and stepped back, gesturing toward the center of my living room. "Gentlemen, please come inside," I said, keeping my tone accommodating and polite. I have no intention of resisting a lawful order. But before we proceed to a hospital, I am exercising my right to legal representation. I have already contacted my attorney. He is riding the elevator up to this floor right now. I ask that you afford him 2 minutes before you place me in custody. The two officers exchanged a wary glance, their heavy leather duty belts creaking as they stepped over the threshold. They were trained to handle unpredictable variables, but a suspect extending a polite invitation while citing procedural rights disrupted their rhythm. Dr. Thorne followed them inside, his expensive leather medical bag clutched tightly in his right hand. He surveyed my slashed couch cushions and the scattered books littering the rug. A triumphant gleam flickered in his eyes. He saw the mess as empirical evidence of a manic episode, a visual aid to support the perjury he had just handed the state. "We can wait 2 minutes," the older officer agreed, unhooking his radio to update dispatch. "But you are still coming with us, Miss Cooper. A lawyer cannot override a medical directive." I did not argue. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and took a slow sip. I had anticipated this exact maneuver. When Trent sent that text message documenting my supposed confusion, my auditor training took over. In the corporate world, when a hostile entity prepares to attack your credibility, you do not wait for the strike. You build an unassailable paper trail. Early this morning, long before Thorne drafted his fraudulent affidavit, I drove to an independent diagnostic clinic in the neighboring county. I paid out of pocket for a comprehensive 10-panel toxicology screen and a full psychological fitness evaluation conducted by a board-certified psychiatrist who had no ties to the Lexington elite. I had the receipts of my sanity. Now I just needed the delivery mechanism. The heavy footsteps in the corridor announced his arrival. Elias Grant walked through the open doorway. Elias was a corporate litigator I kept on retainer. He did not possess the polished country club sheen of my father's attorneys. He was a bulldog, a man who viewed the law as a structural framework designed to be stress-tested. He wore a rumpled navy suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone. Elias surveyed the room, his eyes sweeping over the officers, before locking onto the boutique physician. "Good evening, officers," Elias said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "I am Elias Grant, legal counsel for Miss Cooper. I understand you are attempting to execute an involuntary psychiatric hold based on the recommendation of Dr. Thorne here." The younger officer nodded, pointing to the yellow slip of paper. "We have assigned 5150. We are required to transport." Elias unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a crisp white folder. "You are required to act in good faith," Elias corrected smoothly, stepping between me and the uniforms. "However, executing this document would expose the city, your department, and both of you personally to severe civil liability. The affidavit you are holding is a fraudulent instrument." Thorne stiffened his face, flushing a deep, angry crimson. "That is defamatory," he snapped, taking a step forward. "I am a licensed physician. I consulted with her family. The living room alone proves she is operating in a state of severe distress." Elias ignored him entirely. He opened the white folder and handed a multi-page document to the older officer. "That is a time-stamped, notarized laboratory report," Elias explained. "Miss Cooper submitted to a voluntary blood draw at 8 o'clock this morning. The toxicology screen confirms she has 0 narcotics, 0 psychotropic medications, and 0 abnormalities in her system. Attached to that is a psychological fitness evaluation signed by the Chief of Psychiatry at Mercy General. It certifies that my client is of sound mind, oriented to reality, and exhibits no signs of distress or delusion." The older officer scanned the medical crest on the paperwork, his brow furrowed. He looked from the clean clinical lab results to the yellow slip Thorne had provided. Thorne swallowed hard, the Adam apple bobbing in his throat. A single blood test does not negate a history of erratic behavior. Her parents are terrified. Elias pulled a second document from his briefcase. He did not hand this one to the police. He held it up, angled, so Thorne could read the bold black font across the header. "Let us talk about her parents," Elias said, his tone dropping an octave, settling into a lethal calm. "Specifically, let us talk about a wire transfer initiated 72 hours ago from an offshore account controlled by Marcus Cooper." The color vanished from Dr. Thorne's face. The smug, patronizing mask dissolved into raw, naked panic. "My client is a senior forensic auditor," Elias continued, walking slowly toward the physician. "She tracks hidden capital for a living. Yesterday, she isolated a routing sequence showing a $50,000 deposit landing in a shell company registered to your wife's maiden name. $50,000 transferred right around the time Evelyn and Marcus Cooper realized they needed a compliant doctor to silence a problematic heir." Elias turned to the officers, handing them the financial trace. "This is not a medical emergency, gentlemen. This is an attempted kidnapping orchestrated by a family attempting to defraud an estate and facilitated by a physician who accepted a $50,000 bribe to sign a false affidavit. If you put my client in handcuffs, I will file federal extortion charges before your patrol car reaches the hospital loading dock. I will depose both of you under oath, and I will ensure Dr. Thorne loses his medical license and faces a grand jury for wire fraud." The silence in the living room grew heavy, suffocating the space. The older officer read the wire transfer receipt. He looked at the routing numbers, then slowly shifted his gaze to Thorne. The deference he had shown the wealthy doctor evaporated, replaced by the hardened glare of a cop who realized he had been used as a pawn in a felony. "Is this true, Doc?" the officer asked, his hand dropping to rest on his radio. "Did Marcus Cooper pay you for this evaluation?" Thorne opened his mouth, but no words materialized. His eyes darted toward the open door, measuring the distance to the hallway. He clutched his black leather bag to his chest like a shield. "It was a consultation fee," Thorne stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "It had nothing to do with this order. This is a misunderstanding. I am withdrawing my medical recommendation." He reached out to snatch the yellow slip from the officer's hand. The cop pulled the paper back, folding it and sliding it into his uniform pocket. "I will be keeping this for the incident report," the officer said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Get out of here, Thorne, before I decide to arrest you for filing a false police report." Thorne did not need to be told twice. He turned and practically sprinted out the door, his expensive shoes echoing rapidly down the corridor. The two officers lingered for a moment. They looked at me, taking in my calm posture and the undeniable evidence of the paper trail Elias had provided. They offered a brief, muttered apology for the intrusion, tipped their hats to Elias, and exited the apartment, pulling the shattered door shut behind them as best they could. I stood in the center of my ruined living room, listening to the silence return. I had survived the trap. The psychological warfare had reached its zenith, and I had broken their siege engines. Evelyn and Marcus thought they were dealing with the same timid girl they used to send to her room during their cocktail parties. They thought they could silence me with intimidation and authority. Instead, they hit a fortress. Elias packed his documents back into his battered briefcase. "That bought you breathing room, Jolie, but Thorne will run straight to your father. Marcus will know you are tracking his financial footprint. They will accelerate their timeline." I poured a second glass of water, the cool liquid soothing my dry throat. "Let them accelerate," I replied. "They are playing checkers, Elias. They are using blunt force." I walked over to the hidden compartment and retrieved my encrypted server. I set it on the kitchen island. The failed psychiatric hold taught me a crucial lesson. I could not just defend myself against the immediate threats. I had to dismantle the architecture of their power. My parents had inherited Oakwood Holdings, the toxic shell company Silas built. But Marcus was not a financial mastermind. He did not possess the legal acumen to draft the intricate corporate filings required to manage a fraudulent enterprise. Someone else had drawn up the paperwork. Someone else held the blueprints to the empire. I booted up the server and pulled the metadata from the Oakwood LLC filings. I traced the digital signatures, the IP addresses of the submitting paralegals, and the notary stamps. Every single document pointed back to one man. The same man who had sat at the head of the conference table and handed me the rusted key. Mr. Sterling. The estate attorney was not an impartial executor. He was the architect of my family's crimes. If I wanted to burn their kingdom to the ground, I needed to capture the man who drew the map. The silence of my ruined apartment felt different now. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a victim waiting for the next blow. It was the sharp, focused stillness of an apex predator tracking a blood trail. Elias had warned me that defeating the psychiatric hold would only provoke my parents to accelerate their timeline. They would run to their lawyers, scrambling to secure their stolen assets before I could untangle the web. But they did not understand the fundamental rule of a forensic audit. The cover-up always points to the architect. I sat at my kitchen island, the harsh blue light of the encrypted server illuminating the scattered debris on the floor. I opened the digital metadata linked to the Oakwood Holdings charter. Silas had designed the Toxic Shell Company, but my father Marcus was the one who submitted the finalized amendments to the state. Marcus possessed the financial literacy of a spoiled teenager. He could barely balance his own country club bar tab, let alone draft a multi-layered corporate entity designed to shield high-interest debt. He needed a legal proxy, someone with a law degree, a pristine reputation, and zero moral compass. I ran a diagnostic trace on the portable document format file submitted to the Kentucky Secretary of State. The digital signature belonged to a junior paralegal, but the hidden author tags buried deep in the document properties revealed the true creator, Robert Sterling, the same senior estate attorney who had sat at the head of the polished boardroom table and handed me the rusted iron key. Sterling was a fixture in my family ecosystem. Growing up, he attended every summer gala and holiday dinner. He wore custom-tailored suits, smoked imported cigars on the patio with my father, and possessed a remarkable talent for looking right through me as if I were a piece of misplaced furniture. He presented himself as a pillar of the Lexington legal community, a man defined by rigid ethics and strict confidentiality. The math told a different story. Why would a senior partner at a prestigious law firm risk disbarment to help Marcus defraud an estate? Wealthy lawyers do not stick their necks out for friendship. They do it for leverage, or they do it for a cut. I opened a secondary window on my monitor and initiated a deep dive into the offshore accounts associated with my brother. Trent was notorious for his gambling addictions, frequently running up catastrophic debts with international sportsbooks. I cross-referenced Trent's debt spikes over the last 36 months with the capital flight from Silas's original accounts. A clear, undeniable pattern emerged. Every time Trent faced a six-figure margin call from his bookies in Macau, a block of capital shifted from Oakwood Holdings into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. That shell corporation then wired the funds to the syndicates holding Trent's markers. But the math did not balance perfectly. If Trent owed $200,000, Oakwood Holdings led $250,000. There was a constant 20% leakage on every transaction. I tracked the excess capital. It flowed through a labyrinth of dummy LLCs, eventually landing in a blind trust managed by a boutique wealth management firm in Zurich. I pulled the incorporation records for the Zurich Trust. The registered beneficiary was Robert Sterling. Sterling was not an innocent bystander or a duped attorney simply filing paperwork for a client. He was the toll collector. He drafted the fraudulent corporate filings to help Marcus siphon the estate, and in exchange, he took a 20% cut of every dollar used to cover Trent's illegal gambling debts. He was a criminal hiding behind a framed law degree. I spent the next 2 hours compiling the routing numbers, the IP addresses, and the dates of the illicit transfers. I printed the undeniable proof onto thick, heavy stock paper and slid it into a plain manila envelope. The hunt required a face-to-face confrontation. I knew Sterling's routine. Every Tuesday evening, he left his corner office at exactly 6:30, descending to the private subterranean parking garage reserved for the senior partners. I drove downtown, slipping into the parking structure on foot through an unsecured delivery loading dock. The subterranean level smelled of damp concrete, expensive tire rubber, and the faint metallic scent of car exhaust. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed with a low-frequency vibration. I found his vehicle immediately, a pristine silver Mercedes S-Class parked in a reserved space near the VIP elevator bank. I stepped into the shadows behind a concrete support pillar and waited. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors chimed and slid open. Sterling stepped out, a leather briefcase swinging lazily from his right hand. He wore a charcoal pinstripe suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He hummed a tuneless melody, exuding the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he held the world on a string. He pressed a button on his key fob. The Mercedes chirped, the amber headlights flashing in the dim garage. As he reached for the driver's side door handle, I stepped out from behind the pillar. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the concrete walls. Sterling jumped, his leather briefcase bumping against the side of his luxury sedan. He spun around, his hand instinctively rising to his chest. When he recognized me, the momentary flash of fear melted into his customary, patronizing arrogance. Jolie, he sighed, his posture stiffening. "This is highly inappropriate. If you have questions regarding your grandfather's key, you need to schedule an appointment with my secretary during normal business hours. You cannot stalk me in a parking garage." I did not blink. I closed the distance between us, stopping 2 feet away from his polished shoes. I raised the manila envelope and dropped it flat onto the pristine silver hood of his Mercedes. The paper made a soft, definitive smack against the metal. "I suggest you open that before you decide to lecture me on appropriate behavior," I said, my tone as cold and unyielding as the concrete beneath our feet. Sterling glared at me, his jaw set in a rigid line of defiance. He set his briefcase on the ground, picked up the envelope, and pulled out the printed spreadsheets. He scanned the first page. The transformation was immediate and profound. The blood abandoned his face, leaving his skin the shade of old parchment. The rigid architecture of his posture collapsed. His shoulders slumped, and a fine sheen of sweat materialized along his hairline. His hands began to tremble, rattling the heavy paper against the hood of his car. He flipped to the second page, staring at the routing numbers that linked his Zurich account directly to Trent's illegal bookies. "This is fabricated," Sterling choked out the words, catching in his dry throat. "This is stolen data. It is inadmissible." "It is a forensic financial trace," I countered smoothly, stepping closer. "And it does not need to be admissible in civil court, Robert. It only needs to be handed to the Fraud Division of the IRS and the State Bar Association. You drafted the toxic shell for Oakwood Holdings. You facilitated the theft of Silas's estate. And you took a 20% kickback to cover illegal gambling debts." Sterling dropped the papers onto the hood of his car, his hands gripping the edge of the metal panel to steady himself. The polished, untouchable attorney was gone. He looked like a cornered animal staring at the barrel of a rifle. "What do you want, Jolie?" he whispered, his eyes darting toward the empty elevator bank. "A payout. You want me to cut you a check?" I let a harsh, humorless laugh escape my lips. "You think I am here for your dirty money?" I leaned in, ensuring he felt the full gravity of the threat. "You have a choice to make," I told him, keeping my voice low and measured. "Option 1, you walk away from this car. I trigger a dead man switch on my server, and every document sitting on that hood goes to the federal authorities. You will lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom. You will go to a federal penitentiary right alongside my father." Sterling swallowed hard, the Adam apple bobbing frantically against his silk collar. "And option 2?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Option 2, I replied, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "You go to the equestrian gala this Saturday. When I give you the signal, you use your authority as the estate executor to authenticate a final transfer of assets. You stand in front of the press and the police, and you validate the master trust deed." He stared at me, calculating the odds, searching for a loophole that did not exist. He realized he was trapped in a box of his own making. "I will need immunity," he bargained, a desperate edge bleeding into his tone. "I need a guarantee you will not hand these files over after I help you." "You get nothing but my word," I stated flatly. "You work for me now, Robert. Do not miss the gala." I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing a steady, confident rhythm against the concrete floor. I did not look back. I knew he was still standing there, leaning against his expensive car, staring at the paperwork that marked the end of his career. With the legal gatekeeper flipped, I controlled the execution of the estate. Marcus could not file an injunction without his attorney, and his attorney was now my weapon. But as I drove out of the subterranean garage and merged into the evening traffic, the cold reality of the battlefield settled over me. Financial ruin is a powerful motivator, but wealthy people possess a unique talent for evading total destruction. If I merely exposed the embezzlement and the offshore fraud, Marcus and Evelyn would hire a team of crisis managers. They would file Chapter 11 bankruptcy, shielding their personal assets behind a wall of corporate liability. They would downsize to a smaller mansion, spin a narrative about a hostile corporate takeover, and play the victims of a market crash. They would slither away, wounded but free. I did not want them to downsize. I wanted them in concrete cells. To prevent them from using the bankruptcy courts as an escape hatch, I needed an anchor heavy enough to drag them to the bottom of the ocean. White-collar crime is a game of numbers. Violent crime is a cage. I needed to secure the dark secret Silas had hidden in the margins of his ledgers. I needed the physical proof of the chemical assault. The cash withdrawals pointed directly to my father's boutique pharmacy account. I pulled my car to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel. The final piece of the puzzle awaited me. It was time to hunt down the receipts of their elder abuse. The morning sun offered no warmth as I navigated the winding tree-lined streets of Chevy Chase, the most affluent residential enclave in Lexington. The sprawling brick manors and manicured lawns projected an image of quiet, undisturbed prosperity. This was the neighborhood where my parents spent their weekends, attending charity galas and garden parties. It was also the neighborhood where they purchased the poison. I pulled my Honda Civic into a spot along the pristine sidewalk. I cut the engine and stared through the windshield at the storefront across the street. Oak Haven Apothecary did not look like a traditional pharmacy. There were no neon signs in the windows advertising flu shots or discounted greeting cards. The facade featured frosted glass panes, dark mahogany trim, and a discreet brass plaque beside the door. It catered exclusively to high-net-worth clients who demanded privacy, bespoke compounding services, and a willingness to look the other way when the prescriptions blurred the lines of medical ethics. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a heavy plastic identification lanyard. It was my official corporate credential from the auditing firm, bearing the state seal and my title as a senior compliance investigator. Usually I utilize this badge to inspect commercial warehouses and shipping manifests. Today, I was weaponizing it to bypass medical confidentiality laws. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the collar of my blazer. I smoothed my expression into a mask of bored, bureaucratic authority. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the apothecary. A brass bell chimed softly overhead. The interior smelled of crushed lavender, sanitized countertops, and expensive air filtration. There were no aisles of consumer goods. A single polished wooden counter stretched across the back of the room. A man in a pristine white coat stood behind the register, typing methodically on a sleek computer terminal. His name tag read, Harrison. "May I help you?" Harrison asked, offering a tight professional smile that did not reach his eyes. I walked directly to the counter and dropped my leather briefcase onto the polished wood. I flipped the credential lanyard over, allowing the state seal to catch the overhead lighting. Harrison Croft, I stated, reading his full name from the framed pharmacy license hanging on the wall behind him. "I am Jolie Cooper, Senior Compliance Investigator. I am conducting a routine random audit on behalf of the State Insurance Board. We flagged a series of irregularities regarding the dispensing of Schedule IV controlled substances from this location over the past 36 months. Harrison blinked. The professional smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension in his jaw. "We maintain immaculate records, Miss Cooper," he replied, his voice dropping half an octave. "Our compliance protocols exceed state mandates. Furthermore, I cannot release patient data without a subpoena or direct medical authorization." I did not break eye contact. I leaned an inch closer, lowering my own voice to project a quiet, dangerous confidence. "I am not asking for a generalized data sweep, Harrison. I am asking for the specific, unredacted dispensing logs for a single patient, Silas Cooper." His eyes darted toward the frosted glass of the front window, then back to my face. The name registered. He recognized my last name. He knew exactly who Silas was, and more importantly, he knew the people who had managed his account. "I cannot do that," he stammered, his fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "The HIPAA privacy regulations are very clear." I reached into my blazer pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. It was a printed copy of Silas's power of attorney, naming me as a legal representative of his estate. I placed it on the counter right next to my state credential. "The privacy regulations protect the patient," I explained, keeping my tone flat and relentless. "The patient is deceased. I am the legal representative of his estate, and I am formally requesting a compliance review. You have two options right now. You can print the unredacted history of every medication dispensed under Silas Cooper's name, or I can step outside, make one phone call, and have the State Compliance Division freeze your operating license pending a full federal inquiry into your off-book cash transactions." The bluff hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I did not have the authority to freeze a medical license, but Harrison did not know that. He only knew that an auditor with a state badge was standing in his quiet, discreet sanctuary, threatening to shine a blinding spotlight onto his boutique operation. A bead of sweat materialized near his temple. He looked at the power of attorney document, then at the badge, and finally at my unyielding expression. He swallowed hard. The fight drained out of him. He turned toward his computer terminal. His hands trembled as he typed his administrative password. The silence in the apothecary stretched out, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the keyboard. A laser printer beneath the counter hummed to life. 3 pages of dense, itemized medical logs slid into the output tray. Harrison gathered the papers, stapled the corner, and handed the stack across the counter. He did not say a word. He refused to meet my gaze. I took the documents, placed them securely inside my leather briefcase, and snapped the brass latches shut. "Thank you for your cooperation," I said. I turned and walked out of the apothecary, the brass bell chiming a cheerful goodbye as I stepped back into the freezing morning air. I did not look at the papers until I was safely locked inside the cabin of my Honda Civic. I started the engine, turned the heater on high, and spread the 3 pages across the passenger seat. My eyes scanned the columns. Date of transaction, medication name, dosage strength, method of payment, authorized pickup signature. The empirical reality of the data hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Silas had been prescribed a baseline low-dose anxiety medication years ago to help him sleep, but 18 months prior to his death, the dosage logged in the pharmacy records spiked. The medication shifted from a mild sleep aid to a highly potent, heavy central nervous system depressant. The milligrams listed on the paper were staggering. It was a dosage dialed up to a level that would sedate a grown man into a waking coma, stripping him of his motor functions, fracturing his short-term memory, and reducing his speech to an incoherent slur. I dragged my finger across the row to the payment column. Insurance providers flag rapid, extreme increases in narcotic dosages. They require secondary authorizations and independent medical reviews. To bypass the digital alarm bells of the state monitoring program, the purchaser had bypassed the insurance network entirely. Every single refill for the heavy sedatives was listed under one specific payment method: cash. $4,000 handed over the counter every 2 weeks. I looked at the final column on the right side of the page, the authorized signature for the pickup. The ink displayed a sweeping, arrogant cursive script: Evelyn Cooper. My breathing turned ragged. The edges of my vision blurred. I gripped the leather wrapping of the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, my fingernails biting into the worn material. My parents had not just been stealing his money. They had not just manipulated a corporate holding company or forged a few tax documents. They had intentionally, methodically poisoned the patriarch of our family. They drugged him into a state of artificial dementia. They kept him compliant, confused, and trapped in his own failing body while they drained his accounts and paraded him in front of their country club friends as a tragic victim of a neurodegenerative disease. It was elder abuse. It bordered on attempted manslaughter. The rusted key Silas left me had not just unlocked a secret inheritance, it had unlocked a crime scene. I sat in the driver's seat in the rhythmic hum of the car engine failing to drown out the noise in my head. I could hear my mother's voice echoing from the day of the will reading. The scent of her expensive Chanel perfume seemed to linger in the cold air of my car. I remembered her sharp, mocking laugh when she suggested I sell the key for scrap metal. They had tortured the only man who ever looked at me with genuine pride. Silas had spent his final days trapped in a fog, enduring their chemical assault just long enough to build the financial trap that would eventually ruin them. He suffered in silence so he could hand me the sword. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over me, extinguishing the last remnants of my grief. I was no longer interested in simply taking the money back. I did not care about the sprawling estate in Woodford County or the liquid capital frozen in the offshore trust. Reclaiming the assets was just a logistical necessity. I wanted retribution. I was going to burn their entire social and financial existence to the ground. I was going to ensure that Evelyn and Marcus Cooper never walked into another high society gala, never drank another glass of vintage wine on a country club patio, and never slept in a bed with soft linens again. I folded the pharmacy receipts and placed them in the inner pocket of my blazer, pressing the physical proof against my chest. I had the paper trail. I had the financial ledgers. I had the rogue attorney cornered. But paper only proves the transaction. To seal the trap, I needed to understand the exact mechanics of Silas's final days. I needed to hear the truth from the architect of the snare. And the final, most devastating piece of evidence was waiting for me back home, hidden deep inside the encrypted code of my own server. I navigated the route back to my apartment with mechanical precision. The physical proof of my family's betrayal rested in my blazer pocket, a paper anchor tethering me to a grim new reality. I parked the car, climbed the stairs, and unlocked my door. The splintered wood of the entryway served as a stark reminder of the escalating stakes. I slid the heavy steel deadbolts into place, sealing myself inside. The apartment felt different now. It was no longer a sanctuary or a refuge. It was a command center. I walked into the kitchen, retrieved the encrypted server from the hidden ceiling cavity, and set it on the island. I connected the power supply and linked my primary monitor. The blue glow of the screen washed over the dark room. I had the pharmacy receipts proving the chemical assault. I had the financial ledgers detailing the offshore theft. I had the leverage over the estate attorney. The trap possessed teeth, but I needed the binding mechanism. I needed to understand how Silas managed to orchestrate a sophisticated corporate restructuring while actively being poisoned by his own children. I opened the root directory of the files I had copied from Lexington Secure Storage. As a forensic auditor, I am trained to look for negative space, the gaps where things should exist but do not. I ran a structural diagnostic on the digital folders, cross-referencing the total memory footprint with the actual size of the visible documents. The math did not align. The primary directory displayed 2 gigabytes of tax returns and property deeds, but the diagnostic tool indicated the root folder occupied over 4 gigabytes of storage space. Half of the data was missing from the visual interface. Silas had utilized steganography, the practice of concealing a file within another ordinary file. I isolated the largest document in the directory, a mundane 2,000-page PDF containing 10 years of obsolete warehouse utility bills. I routed the file through a decryption protocol applying the same date format I used to unlock the original hard drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. The computer fan hummed, processing the dense layers of code. The progress bar hit 100%. The PDF fractured, revealing a hidden digital partition. Inside this secure vault sat a single media file, an MP4 video format. I reached for the mouse. My hand hovered over the cursor. For a fleeting second, the cold, detached auditor vanished, replaced by the grieving granddaughter who just wanted to hear his voice one last time. I double-clicked the icon. The media player launched. The screen turned black, then flickered to life. Silas appeared on the monitor. He sat in the leather armchair of his private study at the Woodford County estate. The familiar grandfather clock stood in the background, its brass pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The physical deterioration of my grandfather was shocking to witness. His cheekbones jutted out against pale, translucent skin. His silver hair looked thin and brittle. The tailored suit jacket draped over his frame like a blanket on a wire hanger. He looked fragile, bearing the undeniable physical toll of the heavy sedatives my parents had forced into his system. But his eyes told a different story. The ambient light caught his gaze, revealing a sharp, unyielding focus. The poison had ravaged his body, but it had not touched his mind. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens. Jolie, his recorded voice, crackled through the computer speakers. It sounded raspy, worn thin by fatigue, yet it carried the familiar, commanding cadence I remembered from my childhood. "If you are watching this," he began, "I am gone. And Evelyn and Marcus think they have won the war." He paused, taking a slow, labored breath. "I know what they are doing to me, Jolie. I know Evelyn is crushing the true medication the hospice doctors prescribed and replacing it with heavy, unregulated sedatives. I know Marcus is funding the supply through his private accounts. They think I am slipping into a dementia haze. They think I am too confused to notice the numbness in my hands or the fog in my head. They drug me before the charity dinners, parading me around to build their narrative. They need the world to believe I am incompetent, so no one questions them when they take the reins of the company." A single tear spilled over my lower lash line. The confirmation of his suffering felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. "But I beat them," Silas stated, a fierce, triumphant edge bleeding into his raspy voice. "When they leave the room, I spit the pills into the potted plants. I endure the chemical withdrawals in the dark. I suffer the tremors and the agonizing nausea because I need my mind clear enough to sign the paperwork. They think they are draining my empire to cover the millions Trent owes to his offshore bookies. They think they inherited the kingdom." Silas offered a grim, humorless smile. "They inherited a tomb," he said. "Oakwood Holdings is a toxic LLC drowning in commercial debt I purposefully secured. The true estate, the physical land, the clean capital, is locked inside a blind offshore trust, and you, Jolie, hold the only key." He leaned back in the leather chair, his fierce eyes softening just a fraction. "I watched them treat you like a ghost your entire life." Silas murmured the regret heavy in his words. "I watched Evelyn push you into the shadows while she elevated your siblings. I should have stopped it earlier. I should have protected you. But I knew that if I handed you the estate directly, they would destroy you in probate court. They would use their wealth to bleed you dry and paint you as a manipulator. I could not leave you a target." He reached out his frail hand, touching the lens of the camera. "So I made you my sword. You have the ledgers, Jolie. You have the truth. Let them celebrate. Let them stand in front of their high society friends and claim their stolen crowns. And when they feel untouchable, you turn the key. You show the world exactly who they are. Do not hesitate. Do not show mercy. They showed none to me, and they will show none to you. I am so proud of you, my brilliant girl." The video feed cut to black. The media player timeline reached the end. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. I sat motionless in the ergonomic chair, the glow of the dark monitor reflecting off the wet tracks on my cheeks. Silas knew everything. He endured the physical torture, swallowing the poison, and suffering the agonizing withdrawals just to buy enough lucid hours to meticulously construct this trap. He subjected himself to their cruelty so he could weaponize his own death. He trusted my intellect. He knew I possessed the analytical skill to find the hidden partition, the forensic training to trace the offshore routing numbers, and the cold resolve to execute the final maneuver. The grief that had anchored my heart since his funeral evaporated. The sadness burned away, replaced by a pure, unadulterated sense of purpose. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The tears stopped. I was no longer the marginalized daughter, the quiet inventory auditor hiding in a corporate cubicle. I was the executor of Silas Cooper's justice. I reached for the keyboard to copy the video file onto a secure flash drive. A deafening crash shattered the quiet of my apartment. The sound of breaking glass erupted from my bedroom down the hall, followed by the heavy, splintering thud of a window frame giving way. The hardwood floor vibrated under the impact of someone landing inside my home. My hands froze over the keys. The red herring had expired. The timeline I calculated was wrong. I expected the fake ledger I handed Sloan at the coffee shop to buy me a week of peace. I assumed she would take the doctored paperwork to the corporate attorneys who would eventually unravel the depreciated assets over several days of slow, methodical verification. I underestimated the desperation of a man drowning in syndicate debt. Sloan had not taken the ledger to the estate attorneys. She had given it straight to Trent, and Trent did not possess the patience for legal verification. He likely handed the inventory list to the aggressive forensic accountants employed by his offshore bookies. Those men operate in a world of immediate margins. They spotted the fake shell properties in a matter of hours. They told Trent the ledger was a decoy. They told him his sister was playing games while his debt matured. The fixers in the dark jackets were no longer handling the problem. Trent had bypassed his hired muscle. The golden boy of the Cooper family was out of time, out of liquidity, and out of his mind. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded down my narrow hallway, moving fast toward the glow of the kitchen. He had come for me himself. The heavy, frantic footsteps pounded down my narrow hallway. A shadow stretched across the hardwood floor, cast by the streetlights filtering through the shattered bedroom window. The figure rounded the corner and stepped into the pale blue glow of my kitchen. It was Trent. He looked nothing like the polished, untouchable golden boy of Kentucky high society. The pristine facade he cultivated for the country club set had entirely evaporated. His expensive cashmere overcoat was soaked with freezing rain, the fabric torn at the shoulder where he had snagged it on the broken window frame. Mud coated his designer loafers. His chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths. But it was his face that betrayed the true depth of his predicament. His features were pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide and frantic, with the unique terror of a man who realizes his borrowed time has expired. His right hand gripped a solid steel tire iron. The heavy metal tool glinted under the kitchen pendant lights. "Where is the real trust, Jolie?" he demanded, his voice a raw, desperate rasp. He stepped forward, his muddy shoes leaving dark tracks across the clean linoleum. He pointed the iron bar toward my face. "You think you are so clever," he spat the panic bleeding into his anger. "You think a fake list of depreciated warehouses would hold off the people I owe? The syndicates do not play legal games. Their accountants audited your little decoy folder in 3 hours. They know the properties are worthless shells. They are freezing the estate assets right now. They put a lien on my cars. They are threatening to take my legs if I do not wire the capital by midnight. What did the old man give you?" I stood perfectly still behind the kitchen island. I did not retreat. I did not raise my hands in a defensive posture. I let my right arm rest casually on the granite countertop, inches away from the concealed panic button of my home security system. My analytical mind processed the variables. Trent was cornered. His father could not write a check to save him this time because Silas had trapped the family fortune inside a toxic holding company. Trent was facing the brutal, violent reality of his gambling debts for the first time in his pampered existence. He believed physical intimidation could extract the location of the offshore capital. He thought he could bully the truth out of me, the same way he used to bully me out of the living room when we were children. "He gave me a rusty key, Trent," I replied. My tone was frigid, forensically detached from the weapon trembling in his grip. I stood in Mr. Sterling's office and held it in my hand. You looked right at it. You laughed at it. Trent gritted his teeth, stepping closer until the kitchen island was the only barrier separating us. He raised the tire iron above his shoulder, the heavy steel poised to strike. "I do not care about some piece of junk," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I swear to God I will crack your skull open right now if you do not log into those accounts and initiate a wire transfer. Give me the offshore routing numbers." I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. The unwavering eye contact unsettled him, disrupting the power dynamic he expected to control. "You are not going to strike me, Trent," I stated evenly, "because you are a coward, and because doing so would guarantee you spend the rest of your natural life in a concrete cell." He sneered, gripping the weapon tighter. "You think the police can save you before I swing this?" "I am not relying on the police," I explained, keeping my voice pitched in a calm, conversational rhythm. "I am relying on the smartwatch strapped to my left wrist. It is currently monitoring my biometric data, specifically my pulse. It is wirelessly tethered to the encrypted server sitting right in front of you." Trent hesitated. His gaze dropped to the sleek digital band encircling my wrist, then shifted to the glowing blue monitor on the island. "If my heart rate spikes above 130 beats per minute," I continued, detailing the protocol with surgical precision, "or if I fail to input my primary decryption password into that terminal within the next 10 minutes, a localized dead man switch activates." His brow furrowed in confusion. The adrenaline-fueled rage hit a wall of technical jargon he could not process. "What does that mean?" he demanded, the weapon lowering a fraction of an inch. "It means the server executes an automated command line," I said. "It bypasses all local firewalls and transmits a secure data packet directly to the fraud division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It also copies the state prosecutor and 3 independent journalists." Trent scoffed, trying to project a bravado he no longer possessed. "You think the feds care about a civil dispute over Grandpa's money? You think a financial audit scares the syndicates?" I shook my head slowly, allowing a grim, humorless smile to touch my lips. "The data packet does not just contain the financial ledgers, Trent. It contains the printed pharmacy receipts from Oak Haven Apothecary. It contains the off-book cash payments our father made to secure highly restricted central nervous system depressants. And it contains the high-definition video file Silas recorded before his death, explicitly detailing how you and our mother intentionally poisoned him to secure control of the estate." The air in the kitchen vanished. The revelation struck him with the kinetic force of a freight train. The tire iron slipped a few inches in his grip. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. He thought he was breaking into my apartment to extort money. He had no idea he was stepping into the center of a murder investigation. "If you hit me," I whispered, leaning slightly forward, "the federal authorities will have the proof of the elder abuse and the chemical tampering before my body hits the linoleum. You will not just face the syndicates. You will face a grand jury for conspiracy to commit manslaughter. You are trapped." Trent stared at me. The realization washed over him, dismantling his arrogance piece by piece. He was staring at the scapegoat of the family, the quiet sister he had mocked his entire life. And he finally understood that I held absolute dominion over his fate. The tire iron clattered onto the granite countertop, slipping from his numb fingers. He stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly, as the weight of his impending ruin crushed his resolve. He dragged a trembling hand through his wet hair. "What do we do?" he stammered, the words hollow and small. I reached under the lip of the kitchen island. My finger located the recessed plastic button of the security system. I pressed it firmly, triggering the silent alarm connected directly to the local precinct. "We do nothing," I replied, my voice hard and unforgiving, "because you are out of time." In the distance, the faint, high-pitched wail of a police siren pierced the stormy night air. The sound carried through the broken bedroom window, growing louder with each passing second. Trent jerked his head toward the hallway, his eyes wide with renewed terror. He looked back at me, searching for an ounce of familial mercy, a hint of the sisterly obligation our mother had drilled into us. He found only the cold, unyielding calculation of a forensic auditor staring back at him. He did not attempt to retrieve the weapon. He turned and sprinted back down the corridor. I listened to his muddy shoes slipping against the hardwood floor. A second later, the crunch of broken glass echoed through the apartment as he scrambled out the shattered window, fleeing into the freezing rain like the coward he had always been. I stood alone in the kitchen, the blue light of the server washing over my face. The physical threat was neutralized. Trent had abandoned his post, fleeing the immediate arrival of the authorities. But his desperate attack signaled a profound shift in the war. The blunt force tactics had failed. My family was out of options, and the financial walls were closing in around them. The syndicates freezing Trent's assets would inevitably trigger a domino effect, drawing the attention of federal tax agencies toward the toxic holding company my parents had inherited. The systemic collapse was beginning. I reached for the discarded tire iron, moving it safely away from the electronics. The sirens grew deafening outside my building. I prepared to speak with the arriving officers, knowing the next phase of the battle would not be fought with broken glass and weapons in the dark. It would be fought in the daylight under the flashing bulbs of the high society press. I just had to wait for my mother to make her final, fatal mistake. I parked the patrol officers at the door, gave my statement regarding the shattered window, but declined to press formal charges against my brother. An assault charge would only lock Trent in a county jail cell, shielding him from the far more devastating consequences currently hunting him down. I needed him out in the open. I needed him to run back to our parents and infect them with his terror. By Wednesday morning, the infection became terminal. Silas had designed the offshore trust with meticulous precision, installing a digital tripwire buried deep within the Oakwood Holdings corporate charter. The mechanism was elegantly simple. If the acting executives attempted to liquidate the primary real estate assets to cover external liabilities, the transaction would automatically flag a discrepancy with the federal tax registry. Marcus, blinded by Trent's frantic demands for syndicate capital, made the fatal blunder. He contacted a high-end commercial broker at dawn, attempting to secure a rapid, off-market cash loan utilizing the Woodford County estate as collateral. The title search initiated by the broker triggered Silas's hidden failsafe. The Internal Revenue Service algorithms detected a catastrophic anomaly between the leveraged debt of the LLC and the missing physical deed. The federal response was instantaneous and merciless. An automated audit launched before my father even finished his morning coffee. The Treasury Department issued an immediate sweeping freeze on every single banking account, investment portfolio, and credit line tied to Oakwood Holdings and its managing directors. The artificial wealth my family had paraded around Lexington evaporated in a matter of hours. The systemic collapse rippled outward, catching my siblings in humiliating public snares. Sloan experienced the sudden poverty first. She was shopping at an exclusive boutique in the city center, gathering final accessories for the upcoming equestrian showcase. She brought a stack of designer garments to the marble counter. The clerk swiped her platinum card. The terminal beeped, displaying a bright red declined notification. Sloan offered a dismissive laugh, handing over a secondary premium card. Declined. She provided a third. Denied. The polite deference of the retail staff shifted into poorly concealed pity. Other wealthy patrons paused their browsing, their eyes tracking the unfolding embarrassment. Sloan, the untouchable socialite who mocked my consignment wardrobe, was forced to abandon her items and flee the store under the judgmental stares of her peers. Trent faced a much darker reality. His luxury vehicles were already impounded. He sought refuge at his exclusive country club, attempting to hide in the men's lounge. But the syndicates did not respect gated communities. 2 dark SUVs parked directly outside the club's wrought iron entrance. Men in tailored coats stood leaning against the hoods, smoking cigarettes and watching the driveway. They did not need to enter the premises. They were simply letting Trent know he was a prisoner. The moment he stepped off the manicured golf course, they would collect their pound of flesh. Panic, raw and unfiltered, consumed my parents. Their empire was locked behind a federal firewall. Their children were trapped, and their social standing was disintegrating in real time. At 3 p.m, my cell phone vibrated across my desk at the auditing firm. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times, staring at the screen. For 28 years, a phone call from Evelyn Cooper guaranteed a critique of my appearance, a demand for logistical help she deemed beneath her, or a sharp reminder of my inadequacy. She only reached out when she needed to use me as a footstool. I tapped the green icon and brought the device to my ear. I did not say hello. "Jolie, sweetie," her voice filtered through the speaker. The tone was jarring. It dripped with a sickly, manufactured sweetness, the kind of cloying affection she usually reserved for wealthy donors at her charity galas. Hearing it directed at me felt surreal. The hypocrisy tasted like ash in the back of my mouth. "We have had a terrible misunderstanding." Evelyn continued, her breathing slightly elevated, betraying the terror hiding beneath the velvet facade. "Your father and I are experiencing a temporary liquidity issue, a minor banking glitch, really. But Trent came to us last night in a very bad state. He said Silas left you something incredibly valuable. He mentioned bearer bonds." I closed my eyes, suppressing a cold smile. Trent, in his panicked flight from my apartment, had clearly failed to grasp the complex offshore trust mechanics I explained to him. His brain, wired only for immediate transactional fixes, translated the existence of hidden capital into untraceable bearer bonds. He ran home and told Evelyn I was sitting on a mountain of liquid paper. They believed I possessed the exact instrument required to bypass the frozen bank accounts and save Trent's life. "We are family, Jolie," my mother pleaded, her voice tightening with desperate urgency. "Families need to stick together during turbulent times. You know, we have always wanted the best for you. Please bring the bonds to the house. We can resolve this entire situation together." I sat in my ergonomic chair, gazing out the window of my corporate office. For nearly 3 decades, I was the designated stain on their pristine tablecloth. I was the inconvenient truth they hid in the background of their curated photographs. Now, their ship was sinking into the icy depths, and they were reaching out to grab the very daughter they had tried to drown. I was their life raft. I could have ended it right there. I could have told her the truth over the phone, explaining the depth of their ruin, and listening to her wail as the reality of her impending incarceration set in. But Silas did not endure their chemical torture just to win a quiet argument over a cellular connection. He wanted a public reckoning. He wanted the world to witness the unmasking of the Cooper dynasty. "Of course, Mom," I replied. My vocal delivery was smooth, frictionless, projecting the compliant obedience she expected from her lifelong scapegoat. "I have not cashed them yet." The break-in terrified me, and I did not know who to trust. "Oh, thank goodness," Evelyn gasped, a profound wave of relief washing over the line. "Bring them to the estate right now. Your father will handle everything." "No," I countered, keeping my tone light but firm. "I do not feel safe driving with them in my car alone. I will bring them to the equestrian showcase you are hosting tomorrow afternoon. It is a highly secure event with private guards and valet service. We can settle everything publicly in the VIP tent, where I know Trent cannot try to intimidate me again." A long pause stretched across the connection. Evelyn hated negotiating, especially with me. But beggars do not dictate the venue of their salvation. She was out of time, and she needed the mythical bonds to prevent the loan sharks from dragging her golden boy into an alleyway. "Fine," she conceded, the fake sweetness returning instantly. "Tomorrow, at the showcase. Wear something appropriate, darling. We are so proud of you." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, the silence of my office rushing back in. She could not resist the final parting insult regarding my wardrobe. Even facing the total annihilation of her life, her vanity remained the driving force of her existence. I spent the rest of the evening back in my fortified apartment, clearing my kitchen island to construct the instruments of their destruction. I did not have bearer bonds. I was bringing a guillotine. I purchased 3 sleek, obsidian black leather presentation folders, the kind used by high-level executives to deliver board summaries. Inside the first folder, I placed the offshore master trust deed, flanked by the Internal Revenue Service audit codes and the fraudulent holding company charters. This represented the financial decapitation. Inside the second folder, I arranged the stamped, unredacted pharmacy receipts from Oakhaven Apothecary, pairing them with the financial logs showing Marcus's illicit cash payments. This represented the criminal indictment. Inside the third folder, I placed a typed verbatim transcript of the hidden video file, resting alongside a secure flash drive containing the raw media footage of Silas's confession. This represented the moral execution. I aligned the edges of the heavy stock paper, ensuring every document sat perfectly straight. I closed the leather covers, feeling the solid, satisfying weight of the evidence beneath my palms. The trap was flawlessly set. My parents believed I was walking into their grand event to hand them the keys to their salvation. They thought they had successfully manipulated the quiet, subservient daughter one last time. They were preparing a stage filled with elite guests, local politicians and society journalists, to celebrate their ongoing dominion over the Kentucky logistics empire. I packed the 3 folders into my briefcase and set the rusted iron key on top of the leather flap. Tomorrow, the Cooper family would finally step into the light. The annual Woodford County Equestrian Showcase serves as the undisputed crown jewel of the Kentucky High Society calendar. It is an event where old money flaunts its endurance and new money desperately attempts to buy a seat at the table. Massive white canvas tents pitched across immaculate rolling green paddocks offer shelter to hundreds of elite guests. Local politicians shake hands with real estate developers, while thoroughbred horses parade through manicured show rings. For the Cooper family, hosting this event was the ultimate validation of their ascension. Silas had never cared for the performative pageantry, preferring the quiet hum of his logistics warehouses. But Evelyn viewed the showcase as her personal coronation. This year, it was meant to be the public celebration of their newly inherited empire. I arrived an hour after the gates opened. The afternoon sun cast a bright, unforgiving light across the grounds. I did not wear Valentino or Chanel. I wore the same $50 understated black dress I had purchased from a consignment shop weeks ago. It possessed clean lines, 0 embellishments, and functioned as practical armor. In my right hand, I carried the heavy leather briefcase containing the 3 black folders. I walked past the valet station, stepping onto the pristine grass. The atmosphere around the main pavilion hummed with the melodic clinking of champagne flutes and the low murmur of privileged conversation. But as I drew closer to my family, the facade of their effortless wealth began to fracture under scrutiny. Marcus stood near a towering floral arrangement, holding a crystal tumbler of bourbon. His tailored suit looked slightly rumpled. He was sweating profusely despite the cool autumn breeze, repeatedly dabbing his forehead with a linen pocket square. He darted nervous glances toward the perimeter of the estate, where 2 dark SUVs idled just beyond the main gates. Trent's loan sharks had followed him to the party. They were not wearing seersucker jackets. They were waiting for their money. Sloane intercepted me before I reached the center of the pavilion. She stepped into my path, her manicured hand gripping my forearm with surprising strength. The designer sunglasses could not hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes, resulting from the humiliation of her declined credit cards the previous day. "Where have you been?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with barely contained panic. "Trent is hiding in the stables. Those men outside are not leaving. Just give me the bonds right now, Joe. Hand over the briefcase, and you can go home." I looked down at her hand clamped around my arm, then met her desperate gaze. For my entire life, Sloane had treated me like a poorly dressed servant. Now she was begging for scraps. "Patience, Sloane." I replied, my tone smooth and entirely devoid of urgency. I gently disengaged her grip. "I am not handing over a fortune in the middle of a crowd without proper documentation. We are doing this formally." I stepped around her, continuing my measured march toward the main presentation podium situated at the front of the pavilion. The podium stood on a raised wooden stage flanked by massive banners displaying the Oakwood Holdings corporate logo. A cluster of society journalists and local news photographers milled around the base, adjusting their lenses and preparing for the scheduled keynote speech. This was the moment Evelyn had orchestrated to cement their legacy in the public record. I scanned the sea of faces in the crowd. Near the back of the tent, lingering by a high-top cocktail table, I spotted Mr. Sterling. The estate attorney wore his customary charcoal pinstripe suit, but the arrogant posture was gone. He looked hollowed out, a man attending his own professional funeral. I caught his eye and delivered a single, subtle nod. Sterling swallowed hard. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his cell phone, and dialed a specific number. He initiated the sequence we had rehearsed. The legal gatekeeper was turning the key from the inside. Evelyn spotted me approaching the stage. A jolt of pure predatory relief flashed across her features. She smoothed the front of her expensive silk dress and hurried to the microphone stand. The amplified screech of feedback silenced the overlapping conversations in the pavilion. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and cherished friends," Evelyn announced, her voice ringing out across the paddocks. The forced cheerfulness in her tone was almost painful to witness. She projected a bright, manic energy desperate to maintain the illusion of absolute control, while her financial world burned to ash around her. "We are so profoundly honored to host you all today," she continued, gripping the edges of the podium. "This showcase represents the enduring strength of the Cooper family. As many of you know, my father-in-law, the great Silas Cooper, recently passed away. Silas built a legacy of incredible wealth, unyielding family unity, and profound generosity. Marcus and I are so deeply proud to carry that legacy forward into the next generation." The crowd offered polite, scattered applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the curated grief and the triumphant smile she wore. But Silas was a man who believed in sharing his success with those he loved. Evelyn projected, gesturing widely toward the steps leading up to the stage. "Today we have a very special addition to our program. My daughter Jolie has brought a wonderful presentation for us, an honoring of Silas's final wishes. Jolie, darling, please come up." She stepped away from the microphone, extending her hand toward me. Her eyes locked onto the leather briefcase I carried. The raw, naked greed shining in her gaze was undeniable. She truly believed she had orchestrated the ultimate victory. She thought she was going to accept a stack of untraceable bearer bonds in front of the local media, instantly curing the federal freeze and paying off the violent men lurking at the gates. She thought she had used me one last time. I climbed the wooden stairs. My flat shoes made a quiet, steady rhythm against the boards. I reached the podium. Evelyn leaned in close, the heavy scent of Chanel No. 5 washing over me. "Give me the briefcase," she whispered through a fixed, gritted smile. "Now." I did not hand her the leather bag. I stepped past her, placing the briefcase flat on the angled surface of the podium. I adjusted the microphone, pulling it closer to my mouth. I looked out over the sea of faces. Hundreds of elite guests stared back at me, their champagne flutes lowered, their conversations halted. I saw Marcus gripping a floral arrangement, his face slick with sweat. I saw Sloane biting her thumbnail near the front row. And far in the back, I saw Sterling pocketing his phone, completing the call that would bring the true authorities to the estate. "My mother is absolutely right," my voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers rolling out over the quiet paddocks. "Grandpa Silas left a tremendous, unforgettable legacy." Evelyn beamed, taking a half step forward to claim her prize. I unlatched the brass clasps of the briefcase. They popped open with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed across the microphone feed. At his will reading 3 weeks ago, I continued, the forensic detachment anchoring every syllable. The estate attorney handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single, rusted iron key. My family laughed. They mocked the gift. After all, they had just inherited millions of dollars, luxury properties, and a massive corporate holding company. They believed they possessed the keys to the kingdom. I pulled the first black leather folder from the briefcase and opened it on the podium. But my family did not understand the math I stated, my gaze sweeping across the stunned journalists in the front row. They did not know that the millions they inherited were tethered to a hollowed-out, toxic shell company loaded with commercial debt. They did not know that Silas had transferred the actual physical estate, including the ground we are currently standing on, into a blind offshore trust. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The polite deference vanished, replaced by the electric thrill of a high society scandal unfolding in real time. Evelyn lunged forward, her manicured fingers clawing at the microphone stand. "Turn that off," she hissed, her voice cracking. "She is unwell. She is having a psychiatric episode." I stepped into her path, blocking her from the audio feed. I held up the offshore master trust deed, displaying the notarized seals to the flashing cameras. "The rusted key unlocked the true estate," I announced, my voice cutting through my mother's frantic protests. "As of this morning, authorized by the estate executor himself, I am the sole legal owner of Oakwood Holdings, this property and every liquid asset tied to the Cooper name." Marcus dropped his bourbon glass. It shattered against the patio stones, the sound sharp and final. "The millions my parents received are currently frozen by a federal audit," I declared, raising the second black folder. "Because they acquired that holding company by systematically embezzling capital to cover my brother's illegal gambling debts." I pulled out the pharmacy receipts, holding the stamped logs high above my head for the press to photograph. "And far worse," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the heavy, unforgiving weight of the truth. They secured their control by intentionally poisoning Silas Cooper. They bypassed insurance protocols to purchase unauthorized, heavy central nervous system depressants. They drugged him into a state of artificial dementia. They tortured an old man to steal his money. The pavilion erupted into absolute chaos. Guests shouted in disbelief. Journalists shoved forward, angling their lenses to capture the documents in my hands. The polished facade of the Cooper dynasty shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Evelyn screamed a guttural, raw sound of total devastation. She reached for the briefcase, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees on the wooden stage. The Trojan horse had breached the gates. The city elite were bearing witness to the rot beneath the gold. But the public humiliation was only the first phase of the execution. The final hammer was already rolling down the long driveway. The revelation hung over the pavilion, a heavy, suffocating truth that shattered the pristine Kentucky afternoon. The elite guests of Woodford County did not rush forward to offer comfort or support. Wealth creates exceedingly fragile alliances, and the sudden stench of federal indictments acts as an immediate repellent. The polite applause from minutes earlier morphed into a deafening chorus of shocked whispers. Socialites in designer dresses lifted their smartphones, recording the collapse of the Cooper dynasty in high definition. The curated facade my parents spent decades building disintegrated under the flashing camera lenses of the local media. Evelyn remained on the wooden stage, her expensive silk dress pooling around her knees, her hands covering her face. She was weeping, but the tears did not stem from maternal remorse or grief over Silas. She wept because her captive audience was watching her burn, and her vanity could not process the depth of the humiliation. I shifted my gaze from my mother to the man standing near the edge of the stone patio. Marcus stumbled backward, his polished leather shoes slipping on the spilled bourbon and the shards of shattered crystal. The blood vanished from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, translucent pallor across his features. He bumped into a towering arrangement of white hydrangeas, sending a cascade of pale petals falling onto the pavers around his feet. The patriarch of the family, the man who funded a chemical assault on his own father to secure a fortune, suddenly looked fragile and small. Down in the front row, the reality of the criminal exposure finally pierced the panic clouding Trent's mind. He realized the pharmacy receipts did not just implicate our parents. He had known about the sedatives. He had helped conceal the timeline of Silas's decline to keep the offshore money flowing to his bookies. The word manslaughter echoed in his head, overriding his paralysis with a raw survival instinct. He spun on his heels, shoving past a group of stunned local politicians. He sprinted toward the thoroughbred stables, his shoes tearing up the manicured grass. He thought he could reach an access road. He thought he could escape the perimeter before the net closed. But the perimeter was already compromised. Near the boundary of the paddocks, Mr. Sterling stood by the heavy wrought iron side gates. The estate attorney did not shout or try to intercept my brother. He simply reached out, pulled the heavy iron latch, and swung the barriers wide open. 4 Lexington Police Department cruisers rolled onto the pristine bluegrass. They did not use their sirens. They announced their arrival with silent, strobing red and blue lights that washed over the white canvas tents in a hypnotic, rhythmic pulse. The heavy tires tore deep, muddy ruts into the award-winning landscaping, leaving a physical manifestation of the destruction visiting the estate. Trent skidded to a halt, his chest heaving, his muddy shoes sinking into the turf. The police vehicles fanned out, executing a tactical block across the service roads and the stable exits. Uniformed officers stepped out of the cruisers, their hands resting on their utility belts, their eyes scanning the chaotic crowd. Trent took a frantic step backward, turning his head toward the main entrance in a desperate search for an alternate route. He froze. Just beyond the property line, the 2 dark SUVs remained parked. The men in the tailored coats had not fled at the sight of law enforcement. They stood by their vehicles, their arms crossed over their chests. The lead enforcer caught Trent's eye and offered a slow, grim smile. The syndicates did not care about the flashing police lights. They knew Trent was heading to a county cell, stripped of his assets, stripped of his legal protection, and saddled with a debt he could never repay. Prison would not save him from his creditors. It would only trap him in a smaller cage, with them surrounded by inmates eager to collect a bounty. The realization snapped the last tether of Trent's sanity. His knees buckled. He sank onto the wet grass, lowering his head into his hands, a broken prince waiting for the guards to collect him. Sloane fared no better. She remained frozen near the high-top cocktail tables. Her influencer friends, the people she had relentlessly cultivated to build her superficial brand, were backing away from her in unison. They pointed their phone cameras at her tear-streaked face, live-streaming her disgrace to thousands of followers. She reached out, trying to grab a passing waiter for support, but the young man sidestepped her, leaving her grasping at empty air. Her penthouse was gone. Her premium credit cards were dead. Her social currency dropped to 0 in the span of 3 minutes. The uniformed officers began moving through the parted crowd, navigating the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits with clinical efficiency. 2 detectives holding brass badges walked directly toward the wooden stage. I did not step down from the podium. I stood my ground, my hands resting on the edges of the leather briefcase containing Silas's vengeance. Marcus watched the detectives approach. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow spasms. For 28 years, my father navigated discomfort through avoidance. When Evelyn locked me in my room during the holidays, he looked out the window. When Trent blamed me for his broken rules, Marcus studied his newspaper. Whenever the ugliness of his life surfaced, he utilized a pathetic, cowardly silence to shield himself from accountability. He tried to deploy that same defense mechanism now. He turned his head away from the stage, staring intensely at the grass near his feet. He hunched his shoulders, attempting to shrink into the floral arrangement, pretending the flashing lights and the approaching handcuffs belonged to a different reality. He wanted to disappear. I gripped the microphone. I was not going to let him retreat into the dark. "Look at me, Dad," I commanded. The words echoed through the high-fidelity speakers, slicing through the ambient noise of the panicking crowd. The sharp, unyielding tone of my voice hit him like a physical strike. He flinched, his shoulders jerking upward, but he kept his eyes glued to the stone pavers. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head in a futile rhythmic motion, a child trying to wake up from a nightmare. "Look at me," I repeated. I stepped around the podium, ensuring my voice carried the full weight of the estate he had tried to steal. "You do not get to look away this time. You do not get to hide while the truth cleans up your mess." Slowly, agonizingly, Marcus lifted his chin. His eyes, rimmed in red and swimming with unshed tears, met mine across the pavilion. He saw the daughter he had treated like an unwanted burden. He saw the forensic auditor who had tracked his hidden offshore accounts. He saw the executor of the trust that currently owned the ground beneath his ruined shoes. There was no love in my gaze. There was no pity or lingering desire for his approval. There was only the cold, empirical math of a balanced ledger. Silas had taught me how to read the negative space, and staring at my father, I realized the space where a parent's soul should exist was entirely empty. The detectives reached the patio. One of them stepped over the shattered crystal of the bourbon glass, unhooking a pair of steel handcuffs from his leather belt. The metallic clink of the chain sounded loud and decisive over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. Marcus Cooper, the lead detective, announced, his voice carrying the bored, professional authority of a man executing a routine warrant. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and the criminal elder abuse of Silas Cooper. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. My father did not argue. He did not possess the spine to mount a legal defense on the patio. He turned around, offering his trembling wrists to the officers, a broken man, finally accepting the consequences he had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. Evelyn was hauled to her feet by a female officer, her Miranda rights read aloud over her continuous, hysterical sobbing. Trent was dragged from the grass by two uniforms, his face pale and vacant. The public execution was complete. The Cooper dynasty lay in ruins, dismantled by the very daughter they had tried to erase. But the dust needed to settle, and the final accounting of Silas's empire was waiting to be written. Marcus and Evelyn Cooper, the lead detective, announced his voice, carrying a resonant, uncompromising authority over the stunned crowd. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and the criminal elder abuse of Silas Cooper. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed across the stone patio. The sound broke the spell holding my mother captive. Evelyn twisted her shoulders, fighting the restraint with a sudden, feral panic. The seam of her expensive silk dress tore near the collarbone. The polished, high society matriarch vanished, replaced by a cornered predator, realizing the trap had permanently closed. "She is lying!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet pavilion. She thrashed against the grip of the female officer, her perfectly coiffed hair falling into her eyes in a chaotic tangle. "She is mentally unstable. Look at her. She is delusional. She forged those documents. She belongs in a hospital, not on a stage." She was playing her final card, attempting to deploy the fabricated psychiatric narrative one last time. But the audience was no longer composed of sycophants and paid physicians. The audience consisted of state detectives holding stamped, unredacted pharmacy receipts. I stepped down the wooden stairs of the podium, holding the heavy leather binders against my side. I stopped 3 feet away from where my mother struggled against the steel chains. I did not raise my voice. I did not need volume to project power. "I am an auditor, Mom," I stated, looking directly into her panicked, mascara-stained eyes. "I follow the paper, and your paper leads to prison." Evelyn stopped thrashing. The cold, empirical truth of my statement stripped away her final delusion. She let her head hang forward, her shoulders shaking with heavy, defeated sobs as the officers guided her toward the waiting cruisers. Across the manicured lawn, Trent attempted to break free from the 2 uniforms securing his arms. His brief surge of adrenaline proved useless against trained law enforcement. A 3rd officer stepped in, sweeping Trent's legs and pinning him face down against the damp earth. The golden boy of the Cooper family lay in the mud, his designer suit ruined, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. At that exact moment, a deep, rumbling engine noise drew the attention of the crowd toward the main entrance of the estate. 2 heavy flatbed tow trucks, operated by the very syndicate fixers Trent owed, rolled up the winding driveway. The drivers did not hesitate or wait for police permission. They hopped out, hooked thick steel chains to the axles of Trent's silver Porsche and his custom Range Rover, and engaged the hydraulic winches. Trent turned his head, his cheek pressed into the wet grass, watching his prized luxury vehicles dragged onto the flatbeds right in his own driveway. The local authorities let it happen. Civil asset forfeiture takes a back seat to secured collateral liens, and the syndicates always collect their debts. The fixers climbed back into the cabs and drove away, leaving my brother with nothing but the clothes on his back and a looming criminal indictment. Sloan fared no better. She sank onto the patio stones, her beige trench coat soaking up the spilled champagne and crushed hydrangea petals. She looked up, desperate for a sympathetic face, but found a wall of glowing digital screens. Her influencer friends, the shallow social circle she had relentlessly cultivated, crowded around her. They did not offer a hand to help her up. They pointed their phone cameras at her tear-streaked face, live streaming her ruin to thousands of followers. Sloan wept for her lost penthouse, her frozen bank accounts, and her evaporated social currency. She realized in that crushing moment that her entire identity was a mirage, and the desert had finally claimed her. The legal fallout descended with brutal systemic efficiency. 72 hours after the equestrian showcase, I sat in the back row of a downtown Lexington courtroom for the preliminary arraignment. Marcus and Evelyn stood before a Superior Court judge wearing identical Orange County jumpsuits. The pristine tailoring and Chanel perfume were gone, replaced by the sterile, dehumanizing uniform of the state penal system. The district attorney presented the unredacted pharmacy receipts, the off-book cash transfers, and the high-definition video confession Silas recorded before his death. The evidence of chemical tampering elevated the charges far beyond simple white-collar theft. The judge looked down from the bench, his expression etched with profound disgust. He cited the severity of the elder abuse and the undeniable flight risk posed by their offshore connections. Bail denied, the judge struck his gavel, the wooden crack sealing their fate. My parents were remanded to county custody pending trial. Given the federal tax violations compounding the state manslaughter conspiracy charges, the prosecuting attorneys estimated a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years. Marcus and Evelyn will spend the final chapters of their lives sitting in concrete cells, stripped of their wealth, their titles, and their freedom. Trent secured a plea deal, turning state witness against our parents in exchange for protective custody, terrified that the loan sharks would reach him in the general population. Sloan was formally evicted from her luxury condo by the end of the month, forced to move into a cheap motel on the industrial side of the city. The millions they believed they inherited were entirely consumed by IRS fines, legal penalties, and victim restitution protocols. The toxic holding company dissolved into bankruptcy, burying their fraudulent legacy forever. I took official, uncontested ownership of the Woodford County estate. The first time I walked through the massive front doors as the sole proprietor, the silence of the manor felt different. It no longer carried the oppressive, judgmental weight of my childhood. The ghosts of their cocktail parties and their cruel whispered insults had been evicted. But I had no intention of living in a sprawling mansion designed to project artificial superiority. I did not want to sleep in the rooms where Silas suffered. I hired a team of contractors and initiated a total transformation of the property. We tore down the grand dining room and the opulent formal lounges, converting the manor into administrative offices and counseling centers. We renovated the thoroughbred stables, clearing out the expensive show horses and bringing in gentle, rescued animals. Within 6 months, the Cooper estate officially reopened as the Silas Foundation Therapeutic Riding Center. It is a sanctuary dedicated to disadvantaged youth across the state. Children who grew up in the foster system, kids who face daily psychological battles, and teenagers who feel entirely discarded by the world around them come to the grounds to heal. They learn to ride, they learn to trust, and they learn that their trauma does not dictate their future. They are the kids who grew up feeling invisible, existing as the overlooked shadows in their own lives. Just like I did. Every afternoon I walk out onto the green paddocks and listen to the sound of their laughter carrying on the breeze. It is a warm, honest sound, a stark contrast to the brittle, mocking snickers that used to fill this property. Silas would have loved the noise. He would have loved seeing his land used to build people up instead of tearing them down. I kept my position as a senior inventory auditor at the firm. I still drive my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and I still live a quiet, structured life. The people in my corporate office look at me differently now. They do not see the timid girl sitting in the corner cubicle. They see the woman who systematically dismantled a corrupt regional dynasty, utilizing nothing but a spreadsheet and an unyielding resolve. I still keep the rusty iron key on my daily keychain. It rests right next to the plastic fob for my car. The orange oxidation, a stark contrast to the modern plastic. Every time I pick up my keys, the metal jingles, offering a quiet, persistent reminder of the fundamental truth Silas taught me at the kitchen island all those years ago. Real power does not scream from a wooden podium. It does not demand attention. It does not belittle the people beneath it. And it certainly does not wear Chanel. Real power is patient. Real power is sitting in the shadows, doing the math in the dark, while your enemies are busy laughing in the light. That is my story. It is a testament to the quiet ones, the scapegoats, and the people told to stand in the back of the family photographs. If you have ever been handed the scraps while someone else took the feast, I want to hear from you. Tell me down in the comments. Did you fight back, or did you walk away? Drop your answer below. Hit that subscribe button to keep these stories coming. And remember, sometimes the smallest key opens the heaviest door. Take care of yourselves.